ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stotts and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today we're continuing our series on how to start a nation by discussing war, conflicts and hostilities. So right off the bat, let's ask the question. Should your community, should your nation engage in war, conflicts and hostilities? And the answer very much depends on what kind of nation you are trying to build. Because if you have been following this series up until this point, you will know that what I am trying to educate people on, what I am trying to inform people about, is how you can go about establishing something genuine and generational, something that's going to have an impact on your life and the lives of other people in a positive, proactive way. It's about trying to attain a de facto independence through legal and legitimate means that is based around trying to attain greater levels of self-reliance and self-determination. Now, you cannot do this by engaging in wars and conflicts and hostilities with some random internet user or some buddies of yours from down the road. It just doesn't accomplish anything. But what it might do is it might damage your reputation, and that can in turn have a negative impact going forward. Now, there is nothing wrong with enjoying the nation building experience. There's nothing wrong with going out there and doing things for satire or something a bit more lighthearted. But if you start to engage in these kinds of activities, I promise you that's the kind of reputation that your nation will start to get. And even though you might get a few extra clicks, you might get a few extra followers or whatever else by engaging in these sorts of activities, long term, it will do you no good. So if you do not want to be perceived as a joke nation, which is just trying to justify its own existence by lashing out and declaring all of these different fictional conflicts with these fictional entities for these fictional reasons, then I suggest you avoid using the term wars, conflicts or hostilities and try to maintain some level of composure and actually push forward with building a nation, building a community that is actually genuine and serious about what it is trying to do. And from my own perspective, there really isn't much more to say than that. So instead, what I would like to do is pivot slightly and discuss a similar but nevertheless more interesting topic, which is the question as to whether or not you should establish a military body of some kind for your community or for your nation. And before I get into the meat of that, I did want to insert a caveat here, because for some reason people do get confused when we talk about nation building projects or nation building entities. We are not sovereign entities in our own right. And even when we are fully established and we have a de facto independence and we are attaining greater levels of self-reliance and self-determination more than we could have ever expected, it is extraordinarily unlikely that even at that point, we are sovereign in our own right. And that means that we are still subject to the laws of the lands in which we reside. And that is just a fact. That is just reality. You can debate the cows come home, whether or not it's right or wrong, or whether or not there's a way around it. That is just the world that we live in. And because that is the world we live in, because that is the reality, we are not establishing a conventional military in the same way that a conventional nation will. So when we talk about militaries, we are not talking about something that we're going to build up, arm and equip and use to intimidate, harass or harm in a very serious way other people, other entities or other groups. This is not what I'm talking about, and this is not what this should be perceived as an invitation to do. Now, with that sort of caveat out the way, I do want to discuss some of the pros and cons of establishing a military body for your nation and for your community, because there are very rational arguments to be had on both sides of the line. So, for instance, the arguments in favor of establishing some kind of military body would be it has a practical purpose in the sense that you could use them as stewards for public events. You could make sure they are adorned with the appropriate attire and the appropriate equipment to look the part, but they would have a practical purpose. Another reason that you might want to go down that route is because it does add a layer of realism to the entire experience. If you have people that are fully trained up or equipped and uniformed and they are looking the part, it does attract a greater level of interest, I think, from the wider world, because it does give a sense of realism to it. And because what we are doing is trying to establish something real and something genuine and something generational, that is definitely a point in that favour. And in addition to that, it does have the potential to attract more people to your nation and to your community. If we're being honest, it will more than likely be young men that will be more interested in the militaristic aspect of the nation building experience that we are engaged in. But this is by no means the only reason that they should get involved, which is something I will discuss in a moment. Now, there are going to be a few good reasons as to why you might not want to go down the route of establishing a military body of any kind. The first is cost. So when you try to establish and maintain even the smallest military body, there are going to be a lot of expenses involved in that, in terms of the uniform and the equipment, the potential training involved. It's all going to add up, and it might be financial resources that you can put to better use elsewhere. So first and foremost, that is something that you need to consider, because if it's not done right and it looks cheap and it looks tacky, then it doesn't actually add any value to what you are trying to build. It completely detracts from the original point, which is to add a sense of realism to it. So if you're not able or willing to fork out enough financial resources to make it look professional, make it look real, that is going to be something that you need to consider. The second thing that you want to consider is whether or not you're going to be perceived as a militaristic nation. So for instance, if it takes precedence over other aspects of the nation building experience in your own eyes, are you going to be viewed as a militaristic nation? And is that view going to impact people's willingness to get involved if they think they are joining something that isn't as all-rounded as it should be? If it's just focused entirely on military matters, it's going to limit the pool of people that will want to actually play an active role in what you are building. So that, again, is something to consider. And the final and perhaps most important thing to consider is the kinds of people that you will attract. So if you establish a military body of some kind, as I said earlier, it will be very likely to be young men that want to jump on the bandwagon, want to actually get involved in the nation building project as a part of some kind of military. And that's not unusual or unexpected in any shape or form. But if you're not careful, you might entrust certain equipment, might be lethal equipment. Again, you want to be realistic, you want to be genuine, you want to actually bring about that sense of realism. So you might have lethal equipment in hand, if only for display or ceremonial purposes. But if you hand these to people that are morons, frankly, that aren't trained to equip it, or are a bit gung-ho, or a bit trigger-happy, or whatever else, it could lead to something quite serious, which might have some ramifications on you or your community or your nation. So that, again, is something you need to consider. You need to have people that you trust in those sorts of positions. So those are some of the reasons that you might want to consider not going down the route of trying to establish some kind of military body within your own nation. But they're by no means the only reasons. I'm sure there are many more. These are just the ones that I think are the most vital from my own perspective. So there really isn't a right or a wrong answer to this. Each nation and each community will have their own reasons as to why they do or they don't establish a military body of some kind. It will be dependent on the amount of financial resources they have available. It will depend on the kind of perception that they want people to have of that nation or community, and many other factors. Now, as far as Stomaria is concerned, we established the Imperial Guard within the first year of our existence. We had the custom-made ceremonial uniforms during that first year, and we also acquired the first Stomarian sabres, which were sharpened to add, again, another sense of realism to the whole experience. But these obviously aren't intended to be used in a hostile or aggressive manner. They are there for display and ceremonial purposes. Now, we did eventually transition to a grey military grade uniform. And the reason that we did this, or part of the reason that we did this, is because when we acquired our first territory southward, it was a case of not being able to use the ceremonial uniform in that environment without the risk of getting it damaged in some way. And because these were, as I say, custom-made uniforms, they were quite expensive to create and to maintain, and risking any kind of damage or dirt on these uniforms unnecessarily was just not something that we were prepared to do. But over the course of the next year or so, Stomaria will be in a position to expand beyond southward, beyond this first territory of ours. And so we will be able to utilize the ceremonial uniform in other capacities. And so it is perfectly possible that the grey military grade uniform will no longer be necessary in the way that it was, and we can revert back to using a strictly ceremonial uniform, which will be custom made and will look more the part, if you like, in terms of the colour scheme for Stomaria, the blues and the golds and the whites. And the other reason that we wanted to discontinue the utilization of the grey military grade uniform was that it was something that was heavily featured on our channel, even in this very series, on the How to Build a Nation series. But I stopped wearing the grey military grade uniform in our videos because we did get an uptick of people that were under the impression that Stomaria was far more militaristic than it actually was, which feeds back into what I was saying earlier about the reasons that you might not want to go down the route of having a military body at all, because the perception can be problematic in some instances. And so that is why I discontinued, or one of the reasons I discontinued, the grey military uniform when doing these videos, because I want to give people the right impression. The Imperial Guard is a part of Stomaria. It is an aspect of Stomaria. It is a part of the experience, but it is not the sole experience. It is not the main experience. That is not what Stomaria is about in its entirety. We are a nation that is establishing an empire of autonomous member states, each with their own cultures and identities, and we have trade, commerce, and enterprise at the heart of that empire. We all have a set of values and aspirations that revolve around personal liberty, sustainability, and social responsibility. The Imperial Guard, as a military body, only forms a small part of what Stomaria and the wider empire actually is, and that small part is still evolving to this day. If you want to learn more about Stomaria or play an active role in our development and expansion, visit our website at www.stomaria.com and find out what it means to be a Stomarian.